The Ministry of Home Affairs has issued guidelines for lockdown 5.0. Lockdown will be extended till June 30th. So this is the big news coming in. Lockdown will be extended till June 30th. Curfew from 9 in the evening to 5 in the morning. Malls and places of worship to open from June 8th, but with conditions. Hotels and restaurants will also be opening from June 8th. So this is the sort of staggered strategy that the government of India is employing to come out of this entire lockdown as well. So this is the big news that is coming in at this point of time. And there are mainly three phases that lockdown 5.0 has been split into. Phase 1, where activities such as religious places, hotels and restaurants and shopping malls will be open. Phase 2 is mainly with in regards to schools, colleges and educational institutions. Phase 3 will be about public transport, metro rail, cinema halls, gymnasiums, swimming pools, entertainment parks, social and political gatherings, academic, cultural, religious functions and other large congregations. So finally now MHA has issued guidelines for lockdown 5.0. Now the lockdown 5.0 will come into effect from the 1st of June. For more on this, I'm also joined in by my colleague Adarsh. So Adarsh, looking at this whole scenario now, lockdown 5.0 will come into effect from the 1st of June now. So we are also seeing phases over here which is being introduced by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Phase 1, Phase 2 as well as Phase 3. So Phase 1, we knew it that this was going to come. They are all places of worship, religious institutions, hotels and restaurants. And apart from that, we are also looking at shopping malls too, because there was a considerable amount of pressure by the Hotel Owners Association. Shopping malls also had stated that economy will be down in the dumps, and they are also facing in a lot of problems, mainly in terms with economy. So what does lockdown 5.0 hold for India now? Because it is there till the end of June now. What more do you have to say?
Well, Prajwal, at this point in time, it is on expected lines that there would be an extension of sorts when it comes to the lockdown itself. But very interestingly, from the guidelines that I've just accessed from the Ministry of Home Affairs, it clearly says phased reopening of the entire country and not a lockdown. So it's called Unlock 1 and not Lockdown 5.0. So there's a reason they do not, the central government does not want to really go back to the word lockdown, and they are looking at how to unlock the country. So it is a phased relaxation that we'll see from the 1st of June. Without further ado, let's get in straight to the guidelines that people must be aware of, the guidelines that the Ministry of Home Affairs has come out with, of course, in conjunction with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare Department, as to how the next 1 month or so will really pan out across the country. So first things first, let's take a look as to what they've said. They've spoken about how there will be a phased reopening of areas outside the containment zones. So all of these, most of these regulations or most of these relaxations will only apply for those areas that are outside the containment zones. To start off with, in areas outside containment zones, so-and-so will be available. In fact, standard operating procedures have been given out by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So it's been divided into phases. There are three phases. Under Phase 1, which will come into effect from the 8th of June, we can have religious places, places of worship for public that can be open, hotels, restaurants, and other hospitality services will also be allowed to open, as you were just mentioning as to how several hotels and restaurant owners have been facing the brunt of the lockdown. So now with the reopening or Unlock 1.0 that is going to come into effect, it will be a massive relief for hotels and restaurants and other hospitality services. But yes, how will they ensure social distancing at their premises is something that we'll have to wait and watch. Shopping malls, again, so many questions being raised as to when shopping malls will open. We may as well see them beginning to open from the 8th of June, provided you're not in a containment zone. So yes, there will be standard operating procedures that will be given out by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and all of this will be done in proper consultation with the central ministries and departments concerned. And all of this, the focus really is to ensure social distancing to go ahead and contain the spread of COVID-19. Under Phase 2, which will come sometime in the month of July, Phase 1 again is from 8th June. Phase 2 will come in the month of July.
Let me hold you there. Lockdown to be relaxed in a phased manner outside containment zones. Reopening of areas outside containment zones to be done in three phases. Phase 1, hotels, temples and malls to be open on June 8th. Phase 2, decision on reopening of educational institutions will be taken, as you were clearly pointing this out. Phase 3 will be decision on reopening of theatres, gymnasiums and swimming pools. So that is yet to be taken, and that will be left to the states and union territories to decide.
Yes,
Adarsh, you were going ahead with phase number 2. Please
correct,
go ahead.
Correct. Phase 2, when it comes to phase 2, again, as you were just breaking the news, it's all about how the government has allowed schools and colleges, educational training institutes that can be open after proper consultations with states and union territories. So state governments and union territory administrations may hold consultations at the institution level with parents and other stakeholders, and only then take a call as to what should happen to each of those schools or colleges. Based on the feedback that the government is going to receive, that the administration is going to receive, a decision on whether to reopen these institutions or not will be taken in the month of July 2020. And in this regard, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is also preparing the standard operating procedure in consultation with the central ministries, that is. So phase 3 again will be starting at a later stage. Again, if we were to go back to phase 1, it is June, 8 June, phase 2 July. So phase 3 could be somewhere towards the end of July or the beginning of August, where we would start seeing international air travel of passengers except as permitted by MHA, metro rail, cinema halls, gymnasiums, swimming pools, entertainment parks, theatres, bars and auditoriums, assembly halls, similar places. So all of these are places that usually attract huge crowds, and all of them will begin to open up once it is probably the end of July or August. So that is phase 3 of Unlock 1.0. In fact, if we were to look at the national directives for COVID-19 management, they've clearly mentioned that night curfew will remain, but there is a slight tweak that they have done for the timings. It was 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. up until now, but now they've changed the timings to 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. throughout the country, except for essential activities. So that goes without saying. Local authorities will issue orders in the entire area of their jurisdiction under appropriate provisions of law, such as under Section 144. So timings when it comes to night curfew
coming in now.
has changed.
Nationwide lockdown extended till June 30th. Movement of individuals restricted between 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So that is 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Movement of individuals will be restricted between 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So this is the sort of relaxation that we are seeing in. So nationwide lockdown extended till June 30th, and the curfew will be from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. 9 in the night to 5 in the wee hours of the morning. As of now, we were seeing from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. But now there has been a buffer period of 2 hours that has been given for closing as well as resuming activities too, from 9 p.m. to 5 in the morning. Yes, Adarsh, please go on.
That again is a matter that people need to consider, and people need to really get it into their heads that the timings for the night curfew has changed, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. and local authorities will be giving orders for the entire area of their jurisdiction under the Section 144 of the CRPC, and they are supposed to ensure strict compliance to the night curfew timings. And in fact, the next point that I have right here is pertaining to the lockdown that has been limited to containment zones. Very clear, very important information right here. Lockdown shall continue to remain in force in the containment zones till the 30th of June 2020. So till the end of next month, you will have lockdown that will continue to remain in place when it comes to the containment zones across the country. Bengaluru has well over a dozen containment zones, so no easing of restrictions in any of these containment zones till the 30th of June. So after that, they will take a call as to what will happen. Containment zones will be demarcated once again by the district authorities after taking into consideration the guidelines of MOHFW. Every time there is an extension of lockdown, we have seen as to how the containment zones get demarcated once again, depending upon the number of cases that are cropping up in each of these containment zones, and whether a containment zone has been able to keep a tab on the number of positive cases. Now, when it comes to these containment zones, only essential activities will be allowed, and there shall be strict perimeter control to ensure that there is no movement of people in or out of these zones.
So finally, some guidelines being released for India Unlock 1.0, containment zones to be demarcated by district authorities over here, as you were pointing out, Adarsh. Only essential services shall be allowed in containment zones, which is also the norm right now. Buffer zones to be identified by authorities in containment zones too. So the guidelines has been released for India Unlock 1.0 lockdown to remain in force in containment zones Only essential services shall be allowed in containment zones. Yes, Adarsh, you were going through the lockdown limited to containment zones as well, because yes, it was already pointed out by our sources as well that lockdown will not be eased, or curbs will not be eased in any of the containment zones owing to the number of cases that was coming in and the positive clusters that was identified there.
Oh, yes, indeed. In fact, when it comes to containment zones, that really is a cause of concern, because the number of cases are only on the rise. So in order to really keep a close check on the number of cases in these containment zones, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has also gone ahead and has clearly asserted that when it comes to these containment zones, there will be intensive contact tracing. There will also be house-to-house surveillance and other clinical interventions as required. Guidelines of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare shall be taken into consideration for the above purpose. So how to ensure that people in containment zones are identified in case if they are positive. So some measures being taken right there. But yes, every time a lockdown has been extended, you've had the government speak about how intensive contact tracing and house-to-house surveillance needs to be carried out. So that point being stressed upon when it comes to the lockdown that will remain in effect till 30th of June when it comes to containment zones. And this apart, individual states and union territories have also been asked to identify buffer zones outside the containment zone. So these are small areas outside containment zones, between the containment zone and let's just say a red zone or an orange zone. So this is where new cases are more likely to occur because it is surrounding the containment zone. And within the buffer zones, restrictions as considered necessary may be put in place by the district authorities. So some amount of responsibility given to the district authorities to go ahead and identify as to what kind of a containment zone it is and what kind of restrictions need to be put in place when it comes to these buffer zones. Next, we have a point that says states, union territories, based on their assessment of the situation, may prohibit certain activities outside the containment zones or impose such restrictions as deemed necessary. So freedom really being given to the state governments to go ahead and identify these containment zones and take the kind of action that is required on the ground, because there's never a case of one size fits all. When it comes to unrestricted movement of persons and goods, this again is an important point. This is where the government has said that there shall be no restriction on interstate and intrastate movement of persons and goods. So this comes as a big news once again as to how interstate travel has, in other words, been allowed, and so is intrastate movements. That has already been allowed in the lockdown 4.0. So when it comes to interstate as well, there will be no restriction. That's what the ministry has clearly asserted. No separate permission or approval or e-permit will be required for such movements. We've spoken about how in the previous lockdown 4.0 there was a situation where interstate travel was almost allowed, provided both the states involved in that particular travel are willing for that. So here you have a case where the government is clearly saying that no permission or no separate permission or approval is required once we get into unlock 1.0. However, if a state or union territory, based on various reasons of public health and its assessment of the situation, proposes to regulate movement of persons, then yes, they have been given that free hand as well. So it's all about case to case, because when it comes to interstate travel, it's not always the same case. For example, if you take Maharashtra into consideration, that's a state that will have to really watch out for these provisions and ensure that not all kinds of travel is being allowed. Movement by passenger trains and Shramik special trains, domestic passenger air travel, movement of Indian national stranded outside the country and of specified persons who travel abroad, evacuation of foreign nationals and sign-on and sign-off of Indian seafarers will continue to be regulated as per standard operating procedures issued. So this again is something that has already been spoken about and existed from lockdown 4.0 as to how a few trains have been given out. So the movement of those trains will continue unrestricted. Shramik special trains will also continue, and domestic air travel will also be allowed. So no mention of international travel, so that is out of question at this point in time. No state or union territory shall stop the movement of any type of goods or cargo for cross-land border trade under treaties with neighboring countries. So No question of stopping any kind of cargo movement, so that has also been allowed, and this comes under the treaties, various treaties with our neighboring countries. When it comes to protection of vulnerable persons, this in fact speaks about those above the age of 65 and those below the age of 10. All of such people and those with comorbidities, as in pre-existing conditions, and pregnant women have been advised to stay at home except for essential and health purposes. So this continues to remain the case ever since the beginning, from lockdown 1.0 till lockdown 4.0, and now in unlock 1.0 as well. You have a case where the government has clearly stated that those above 65, those below 10, and those with comorbidities and pregnant women must stay at home unless they have to really go out for some essential or health purposes. The government has also spoken about the usage of Aarogya Setu app. This is something that finds a mention in almost all of the guidelines issued by the government. They've again tried to speak about what the app really does. Enables early identification of potential risk of infection and thus acts as a shield for individuals and the community. With a view to ensuring safety in offices and workplaces, employees on best effort basis should ensure that Aarogya Setu is installed by all employees having compatible mobile phones. So this again is a point that I remember very clearly from lockdown 4.0 as to how Aarogya Setu app was made compulsory for all those people who are heading to offices, all the employees essentially. So spoken about what the Aarogya Setu app does, and they've also spoken about how to ensure the safety of all the employees. The employees must download the Aarogya Setu app. They've also spoken about how the district authorities may advise individuals to install the Aarogya Setu application on compatible mobile phones and regularly update their health status on the app. So it's all about feeding your details to the app, your vital details, how you're doing. That information needs to be fed into the app so that it is able to keep a track on your health condition and also on those surrounding you. So this will of course facilitate timely provision of medical attention to those individuals who are at risk. When it comes to strict enforcement of the guidelines, again, this goes without saying as to how the state and union territory governments have been clearly asked not to dilute these guidelines that have been issued, that we have gone through up until this point in time. But if in case required, they can obviously tweak it depending upon their situation, depending upon what's really happening in their state. But dilution of these guidelines has been strictly prohibited. All the district magistrates will have to strictly enforce all of the above measures that we've just discussed. And when it comes to the punishment itself, there are penal provisions, sections 51 to 60 of the Disaster Management Act and section 188 of the IPC. You will attract punishment in case if you are found violating any of these guidelines for Unlock 1.0 that we've just discussed. So apart from that, they've also spoken about a few directives that have been put forth by the COVID-19 management team. They've spoken about how a few things must be carried, almost like a few pointers. In fact, they've spoken about how face coverings have been made mandatory. They have spoken about wearing of face cover is compulsory in public places, in workplaces, and during transport. In case if we could really look at the points that are being laid out, if the cameraman could get us the points going on the screen for the benefit of our viewers. They've spoken about the national directives for COVID-19 management. There are 10 points right here, so we'll start with number 1, face coverings. Most important, wearing of face cover is compulsory in public places, in workplaces, and during transport. Social distancing, do gaj duri, what Prime Minister Modi has spoken about. Individuals must maintain a minimum distance of 6 feet. Shops will ensure physical distancing among customers and will not allow more than 5 persons at one time. This again becomes a bone of contention because we've seen in lockdown 4.0 itself as to how several shops were found violating the norms, and people were also not doing their bit to ensure social distancing is maintained. So social distancing, that point itself has been reiterated by the government as to how shops will have to ensure physical distancing among customers. So clearly the government has noted that when it comes to these shops, not everything is going all right. When it comes to gatherings, yes, large gatherings, public gatherings remain prohibited. Marriage related gatherings, number of guests not to exceed 50. Again, this goes back to our previous guidelines that were issued. So that remains remains as is. When it comes to funeral or last rites related gatherings, number of persons not to exceed 20. So that also has remained from the last time around. Spitting has found a mention. Spitting in public places will be punishable with fine as may be prescribed by the state, union territory, local authority in accordance with its laws, rules or regulations. So spitting happens to be one of those ways in which vector-borne diseases can be spread, and coronavirus, in case if you're a COVID infected person, then spitting could really prove to be detrimental for those around you. And obviously you have a situation where the government has taken cognizance of that, and I've said that spitting in public places will be punishable with fine. So that has to be noted, and governments will be taking a call as to how much fine will be imposed, of course in accordance with all kinds of laws, rules and regulations. Consumption of liquor, pan, gutka, tobacco in public places has been prohibited. While the sale of all of this has been allowed, you cannot consume, or you cannot be spotted consuming it anywhere outside. So again, if you're found consuming any of this, you will be booked under various sections. Work from home again has been encouraged as far as possible. Despite the fact that we're slowly looking at Unlock 1.0, work from home has been encouraged and has found a mention in Unlock 1.0 as well. Staggering of work or business hours will be followed in offices, workplaces, shops, markets and industrial and commercial establishments. So it cannot be a case where people will be able to get back to their markets and workplaces in one go. It has to be in a staggered manner, in a slow manner, in a sense that only after bit by bit you should have more and more people getting back to their workspaces. Screening and hygiene. Provision for thermal screening has to be made. Hand wash, sanitizers will be made at all entry and exit points and common areas. So this holds good for any particular establishment that is opening up, right from restaurants, hotels, or be it malls, gyms, any of these establishments, even offices for that matter. All kinds of screening methods, thermal screening and also hand wash and sanitizers must be made available for personal hygiene. Frequent sanitization of entire workplace, common facilities and all points which come into human contact like door handles will be ensured, including between shifts. So this again is something that that the government will have to keep in mind, and also the offices and the employers will have to keep in mind and ensure that they're responsible on ground. They should ensure that the entire workplace between shifts are sanitized, especially high contact surfaces like door handles, doorknobs should be sanitized regularly because they come in human contact quite regularly. Social distancing once again finds a mention. All persons in charge of workplaces will ensure adequate distance between workers, adequate gaps between shifts, staggering the lunch break of the stuff. Punishments I'll roughly go through. I'll not go through the entire punishments, but section 51 to 60, you could attract a punishment of when it comes to the Disaster Management Act 2005. This in fact speaks about punishment for obstruction of any of the rules or any of the guidelines that we've just spoken about. You could be booked between section 51 to 60 of the Disaster Management Act 2005. Punishment for false claims finds a mention. You could be booked for making a false claim on part of the government or misinterpreting certain information. Punishment for misappropriation of money or materials also has found a mention. Punishment for false warnings also will be taken into cognizance. And when it comes to offences by departments of the government, that has also found a mention. Failure of officer in duty or his connivance at the contravention of the provisions of this act. So in case if somebody is found flouting, if an officer or if a person in power is found in a sense not doing his or her duty to ensure that all of these Unlock 1.0 guidelines are followed, then yes, that person can also be booked. There will be a penalty for contravention of any order regarding requisitioning offense by companies. So we've just discussed a few a few things that companies should keep in mind. So if any of the companies are found not following any of the guidelines issued under Unlock 1.0, then there will be punishment under that as well. There will be a previous sanction for prosecution, cognizance of offences. Section 188, that is disobedience to order duly promulgated by a public servant. So these are all essentially the sections under which you could be booked in case if you're found not following the unlock guidelines 1.0, and in case if a government employee or even if an employer is not found following any of the guidelines, then yes, right from the Disaster Management Act guidelines to the section 51 to 60, you could attract punishment and penalty. So this is where unlock 1.0 really looks like. Some of the big takeaways, you have a phased manner in which non-containment zones will begin to open up, and apart from that, you also have a situation where interstate travel has been allowed. And when it comes
let me hold you
yes.
there. Karnataka, first of all, now finally the centre has allowed state government to take charge of the entire situation. The centre has allowed states to take the final decision. Government will be deciding on opening of temples after assessing the situation. The Karnataka government to take decision on opening hotels soon. Centre allows state government to take decision on easing curbs as well. So after they analyze the ground situation or the ground scenario here, they will be taking the final decision, because I was about to come to you on this. The Karnataka government will also be taking a decision on opening hotels soon. First and foremost now, looking at this entire scenario out here, Adarsh, one thing that we need to learn is Phase 2 and Phase 3 is something which is very important for the economy as well. If you look at Unlock 1.0 guidelines, because somewhere in point number 1 where they have told that it will be a staggered exit as well, they have clearly stated that nobody should be violating the orders which has been issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs under the National Disaster Management Act of 2005. But also at the same point of time, it is the central government who is giving a leeway or a free hand to the state governments to take their own decision after assessing the situation. So it is needless to say of the fact that you might not have to wait till the end of July for cinema halls, gymnasium, swimming pools, entertainment parks, auditorium, assembly halls, as well as even metro rail to function as well, because public transport was something which was spoken about, and especially people living in metros had objected to this and stated that the metro should be opened as well. So your take on this and what might happen as well if you're looking at states or rather cities like Mumbai, Bengaluru, as well as the central part of Delhi too. What might be in effect, especially when it comes to public transport and metros?
Well, the bottom line really is, Prajwal, at this point in time, the government may have given out the guidelines for Unlock 1.0, but they have clearly stated that none of these guidelines should be diluted by the state governments. All they have said is they can be slightly tweaked in case if a relaxation is too much of a relaxation for a certain area or maybe a certain city, when it comes to a certain aspect, then that relaxation does not have to be given out. So that's what they essentially mean. And yes, right, like you just pointed out, when it comes to the phase 2 itself, when you're talking about schools, colleges, and so on and so forth, the education institutions that will be open, very important for the economy, but it has to be done so in such a way that it has minimal impact on the people of the state itself. So yes, each and every state across the country has a decision to choose as to how they perceive these lockdown guidelines, in a sense Unlock 1.0 guidelines that have been given out. But yes, dilution of it is something that the government has clearly said is a big no-no. But as we were just discussing, when it comes to a few aspects, when it comes to a few services, in a few areas, yes, you cannot have a situation where the Unlock 1.0 guidelines can be taken into consideration, and that is the reason why that is the place where the Karnataka government or any state government for that matter can come in and say, okay, look, when it comes to this particular aspect and this particular area, we are not happy, so we are going to ensure that let's just say malls will not be open in this particular area. So that's where it really boils down to it. It's all about a case of one size fits all. It is really not the case. So every state and every district will have different needs and requirements on the ground. So depending upon that, the best decision be taken based on the Unlock 1.0 guidelines. Back to you, Prajwal.